Hey listeners, welcome back to Temptation of Darkness. I'm your host, Evan Graves, and tonight's story is one that'll make you question not only what you see, but also what might be seeing you. This tale comes from the dark corners of small-town America, a place where technology meets superstition, grief collides with fear, and the line between reality and nightmare blurs dangerously thin. So grab a drink, dim the lights, and settle in. Let's get started. It all began 3 years ago for James Harper, a man who prided himself on logic and skepticism. Growing up in rural Ohio, he'd heard every ghost story and urban legend imaginable. Hollow-eyed spirits haunting cornfields, cursed objects passed down through generations, whispers of shadowy figures lurking at the edges of vision. But James never bought into any of it. He was a practical guy, someone who believed in science over superstition, evidence over hearsay. That was until his grandfather's death turned his world upside down and left him staring into something he couldn't explain. James's grandfather, Henry, had been a pillar of strength for as long as anyone could remember. A farmer by trade, Henry was the kind of man who could fix anything with a wrench and a stubborn streak a mile wide. His wife, Margaret, had been his partner in every sense of the word. Together, they'd built a life in their modest farmhouse nestled deep in the countryside. But when Margaret passed away unexpectedly, everything changed. Without her, Henry seemed to unravel. At first it was subtle, forgetting to lock the barn door, leaving tools scattered across the yard. But soon, more serious issues surfaced. His health declined rapidly, culminating in a diagnosis of macular degeneration that left him completely blind within months. Suddenly, the man who once navigated his property with ease now needed help finding his way to the kitchen table. It broke James's heart to watch, so he stepped up, making weekly trips out to the farmhouse to care for his grandfather while juggling his own life back in Columbus. But even with family pitching in, Henry struggled. The isolation gnawed at him, turning him into a shell of the man he used to be. To ease his own worries about leaving Henry alone during the week, James installed a state-of-the-art smart camera system throughout the house. The cameras were equipped with advanced AI capable of distinguishing between humans, animals, and environmental movements like wind or falling leaves. Every time the system detected motion, James received an alert on his phone. If it sensed a person, the notification would read, "Human detected." For months, the system worked perfectly, giving James peace of mind, knowing he could check in whenever he wanted. Then came the call no one ever wants to receive. One crisp October morning, James's sister, Claire, phoned him in a panic. Henry had collapsed during breakfast. By the time paramedics arrived, he was barely conscious. They rushed him to the nearest hospital, diagnosed him with pneumonia complicated by underlying conditions, and admitted him indefinitely. A few days later, under tightened COVID protocols, they transferred him to a facility closer to James and Claire. Visits became impossible, and communication dwindled to brief updates from nurses over the phone. And then, he died. It happened quickly, quietly, almost mercifully. One moment, James and Claire were planning how to bring Henry home once restrictions lifted. The next, they were arranging his funeral. Grief hit hard, compounded by guilt over not being able to see him in his final days. Their grandfather's passing felt like the end of an era, leaving behind a void neither sibling knew how to fill. But here's the thing, the notifications didn't stop. 2 days after Henry's death, James's phone buzzed with the familiar alert. Human detected. Confused, he opened the app and pulled up the live feed. The farmhouse looked exactly as it should have. Empty, silent, frozen in time. Chairs sat untouched, curtains drawn tight against the autumn chill. Nothing moved except dust motes drifting lazily in the sunlight streaming through the windows. He shrugged it off. Technology glitches sometimes, right? Maybe a neighbor wandered onto the property, or maybe the wind triggered the sensors. Either way, James figured it would sort itself out, except it didn't. Over the next week, the alerts kept coming, sometimes multiple times a day. Each time, James checked the footage, and each time, nothing appeared out of the ordinary. Just an empty house waiting for occupants who would never return. Yet the notifications persisted. Human detected. Always human. Never animal. Never false positives. By now, paranoia had started creeping in. What if someone had broken in? Squatters? Thieves? But why wouldn't they show up on camera? And why only trigger the human detection algorithm? None of it made sense. One night, unable to sleep, James decided to review the recordings again. Instead of jumping straight to the flagged clips, he scrolled back through hours of footage. Most of it was uneventful. Long stretches of silence punctuated by the occasional flicker of light as clouds drifted across the moon. But then, around 3:17 a.m., something caught his eye. In the corner of the frame, near the doorway leading to the kitchen, there was a faint distortion, like heat waves rising off asphalt in summer. Except it wasn't hot enough for that. The air inside the house was cool, almost cold. As James zoomed in, the distortion shifted slightly, forming what looked like a shape. Humanoid but wrong. Too tall. Too thin. Its edges blurred and shimmered, as though it existed halfway between dimensions. His heart pounded as he rewound the clip. There it was again. Standing perfectly still, yet somehow radiating menace. It didn't move, didn't blink, didn't breathe. It just watched through the lens, straight at him. James slammed the laptop shut and backed away, his pulse racing. Was this some kind of prank? A deepfake? Or was he losing his mind? Rational explanations fled his brain like rats abandoning a sinking ship. All he knew was that whatever or whoever that thing was, it shouldn't exist. The next morning he called Claire. Her reaction mirrored his. Disbelief followed by unease. Together they agreed to drive out to the farmhouse and investigate. If nothing else, they needed closure. Maybe the system had malfunctioned. Maybe there really was an intruder. Whatever the case, ignoring it felt impossible. When they arrived, the place felt different. Not haunted, not exactly, but heavy, like the air itself carried weight. The front door creaked open under Claire's touch, revealing rooms coated in a fine layer of dust. Everything was exactly as they'd left it, untouched since Henry's final days. Except for the smell. It was faint but unmistakable, earthy, metallic, like wet soil mixed with rust. It clung to the back of James' throat, making him gag. Claire wrinkled her nose too, muttering about mold or rot. But neither of them believed that explanation. Something darker lingered here. They split up to search the house. Claire took the upstairs bedrooms while James stayed downstairs, double-checking the cameras. They were still operational, their red lights blinking steadily. He tapped into the live feed using his phone, scanning each room methodically. Nothing unusual appeared on screen. Just dusty furniture and peeling wallpaper. until he reached the kitchen. There, standing in the doorway, was the figure from the video. Only this time, it wasn't confined to the screen. It stood before him, impossibly tall and gaunt, its skin translucent and stretched taut over sharp bones. Its eyes, if you could call them that, glowed faintly, twin pinpricks of amber light boring into his soul. James froze, unable to scream, unable to run. His legs refused to obey commands, rooted to the spot by sheer terror. Then it spoke. Its voice wasn't audible in the traditional sense. It resonated inside his head, low and guttural, like gravel grinding against steel. "You shouldn't have looked," it said. Or maybe it didn't say anything at all. Maybe it simply implanted the thought directly into his mind. Either way, the message was clear. James had crossed a boundary he didn't understand. Behind him, Claire screamed. He spun around just in time to see her stumble backward, clutching her chest. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with shock. "What the hell is that?" she gasped, pointing toward the figure. Before James could answer, it vanished. Not gradually, not fading away. It blinked out of existence like a light switch flipping off. One moment it was there, looming over them, and the next, it was gone. They didn't stay to investigate further. Grabbing what little belongings remained, they bolted from the house, slamming the door shut behind them. Neither of them spoke until they were safely back in the car, speeding down the deserted country road. Weeks passed before either of them returned to the farmhouse. Eventually, they hired a contractor to board it up permanently. The cameras stayed active for a while longer, but the alerts stopped altogether. Whatever had been watching them had moved on, or perhaps found another way to observe. To this day, James doesn't know what it was. A remnant of Henry's spirit? Some parasitic entity feeding off their grief? Or maybe just a glitch in the system, a trick of the light amplified by fear and exhaustion. Who can say? What he does know is this: some doors are better left closed. Some questions don't have answers. And sometimes when you stare too long into the void stares back. Thanks for tuning in to Temptation of Darkness. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with your friends. Until next time, keep the lights on, and remember, not everything has a logical explanation. Good night, everyone. Stay safe.